The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse apartment, but David couldn't hear it over the sound of his own heartbeat. He stood frozen in the middle of his living room, watching the woman he loved gather her few belongings with shaking hands. Maria moved slowly as if every step hurt, her eyes red and swollen from crying. His mother, Catherine, stood near the doorway with her arms crossed, her face cold and hard as stone. She had arrived an hour ago with papers, lawyers, and ultimatums. The message was clear: choose the family business or choose this girl from nowhere. There was no middle ground, no room for discussion, no possibility of compromise. David had been preparing for this conversation for weeks, but nothing could have prepared him for how it actually felt. 3 years. 3 beautiful years with Maria, and now it was ending in the worst possible way. They had met at a small coffee shop where she worked the morning shift. He had been running late for a meeting, stressed and irritable when her warm smile had stopped him in his tracks. She had a way of making everyone feel seen, even in the middle of the breakfast rush. Their relationship had been his secret escape from the suffocating world of corporate dinners and board meetings. With Maria, he could just be David, not David Richardson, heir to Richardson Global Industries. She never asked him for anything, never wanted expensive gifts or fancy restaurants. She was happy with street food and walks in the park. She made him laugh. She made him feel human again. But his father had died 6 months ago and everything changed. The company needed strong leadership. The board of directors were circling like sharks, questioning whether a 32-year-old was ready to take control of a $15 billion empire. His mother had made it very clear: any sign of weakness, any hint of poor judgment, and they would remove him from the position his father had groomed him for his entire life. And apparently, Maria was poor judgment. She works 2 jobs just to pay her mother's medical bills, Catherine had said earlier, her voice dripping with disdain. Her family has nothing. No connections, no education, no class. The board already knows about her, David. They're watching. If you marry this girl, they'll vote you out before the ink dries on the marriage certificate. Maria worked as a waitress in the evenings after her coffee shop shift ended. Her mother had diabetes and heart problems, and the medical bills never stopped coming. Maria sent money home every week, barely keeping anything for herself. She lived in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates and wore the same clothes until they fell apart. But she never complained. She never asked David for help, even when he offered. Her pride was fierce, and he loved her for it. "David, please," Maria whispered now, looking up at him with those beautiful brown eyes that had captivated him from the first day. "Say something. Tell me this isn't really happening." His throat felt tight. The words he wanted to say were stuck somewhere deep in his chest, tangled up with fear and duty and all the expectations that had been placed on him since birth. He thought about the company, the thousands of employees who depended on Richardson Global for their livelihoods, the legacy his father had built over 40 years. He thought about the board meeting scheduled for next week, where they would officially vote on his position as CEO. "We're from different worlds. Maria," he heard himself say, and the words felt like broken glass in his mouth. "I need someone who understands my lifestyle, who can handle the pressure and the public scrutiny, someone who can stand beside me at charity galas and investor meetings, someone who fits into this world." Maria's face crumpled, and she grabbed the back of the sofa to steady herself. "Different worlds? David, I've been in your world for 3 years. I've learned, I've adapted, I've done everything to fit in. I took those etiquette classes you suggested. I dressed the way you asked. I smiled and made small talk with your friends even when they looked down on me. What more do you want from me?" Catherine made a disapproving sound from the doorway. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, David. The dramatics, the emotional manipulation. This is not the kind of woman who should be associated with the Richardson name." "I'm not manipulating anyone." Maria's voice rose, anger mixing with her despair. "I love him. I've loved him for 3 years, through everything. When everyone else wanted something from him, I just wanted him. Just David, not his money or his name or his connections. David wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her that his mother was wrong, that they could figure this out together. But his feet wouldn't move. He could see his entire future crumbling if he made the wrong choice. The company would be handed to his cousin, Thomas, who had been waiting in the wings for years. All his father's work, all his own sacrifices, everything would be for nothing. Maria wiped her tears with the back of her hand and straightened her shoulders. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost resigned. "There's something I need to tell you, David. I wasn't sure how to say it, but I guess now is as good a time as any." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. I found out 3 days ago, and I've been trying to figure out the right moment to tell you. I guess there's never a right moment for news like this." The room fell completely silent except for the rain still beating against the windows. David felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Pregnant. Maria was pregnant with his child. His mind raced trying to process this new information, trying to understand what it meant for everything. Catherine moved quickly, stepping between them with her phone already in her hand. "How convenient. How perfectly timed. Did you plan this, girl? Did you think trapping my son with a pregnancy would secure your future?" Maria's face went pale, then red with fury. "Trap him? You think I planned this? I didn't even want to tell him like this. In front of you, in the middle of this nightmare. But yes, I'm pregnant, and yes, it's his child, and no, I don't want anything from him or from you." David's brain felt foggy, overwhelmed. He looked at Maria's stomach, still flat under her simple dress, and tried to imagine a child. His child. Their child. Part of him wanted to be happy, wanted to celebrate this news, but the timing couldn't be worse. The board would never accept this. An illegitimate child with a waitress would be ammunition for everyone who wanted him removed from leadership. "This changes nothing," Catherine said firmly, looking at David. "In fact, it makes the situation clearer. She'll obviously need financial support, and we'll provide it, generously. But there will be papers to sign, agreements about discretion, no public acknowledgement of paternity. Are you listening to yourself?" Maria's voice shook with rage and hurt. "I don't want your money. I don't want your agreements. I want the man I fell in love with to stand up for once in his life and make his own decision." She turned to David, and the look in her eyes would haunt him for years to come. It was a look of absolute devastation mixed with the smallest glimmer of hope, like she was giving him one last chance to prove her wrong about what kind of man he really was. But David stayed silent. The weight of his responsibilities, his mother's expectations, the board's demands, all of it pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Maria waited for 10 seconds that felt like hours. Then she picked up her bag, pulled her thin jacket around her shoulders, and walked to the door. She stopped just before leaving and looked back one final time. "I hope your empire keeps you warm at night. David, I hope it's worth everything you're giving up." Then she was gone, and David stood in his expensive penthouse surrounded by luxury, feeling more empty than he had ever felt in his entire life. His mother began talking about damage control and legal agreements, but he couldn't hear her anymore. All he could hear was the sound of the door closing behind Maria, taking his heart and his unborn child with her. 3 weeks later, when the guilt finally overwhelmed him, David hired private investigators to find her. But Maria had vanished completely. Her apartment was empty, her roommates knew nothing, and her mother had moved to a different state. It was as if she had never existed at all, except for the hole she left in David's chest that never quite healed. 23 years had passed since that rainy night, and David Richardson had everything a man could want. At 55, he stood at the top of one of the world's most successful companies. Richardson Global Industries had tripled in size under his leadership. He had offices in 40 countries, a private jet, homes on 3 continents, and more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But every success felt hollow. Every achievement was shadowed by the memory of what he had lost. He had tried to move on. 5 years after Maria disappeared, his mother had arranged a marriage with Victoria Ashford, daughter of another wealthy family. The wedding had been featured in every major magazine. The reception had cost $3 million, and the marriage had been absolutely miserable from day one. Victoria wanted the Richardson name and the lifestyle that came with it. David wanted to feel something, anything that resembled the warmth he had felt with Maria. They lived like polite strangers in the same house, attending events together, smiling for cameras, and sleeping in separate bedrooms. After 5 years of pretending, they divorced quietly. No drama, no fighting, just 2 people admitting they had never really been married in any way that mattered. There were no children from that marriage. Victoria hadn't wanted any, and David had secretly been relieved. Somewhere out there he had a child he had never met, never held, never watched grow up. The thought of having another child with someone he didn't love felt like a betrayal of the one he had abandoned. His mother had died 3 years ago, taking her expectations and demands with her. Sometimes David wondered if things would have been different if she hadn't been there that night. But he knew the truth. He had made his own choice. He could have fought for Maria, could have told the board and his mother and everyone else to back off. But he hadn't. And that was something he had to live with every single day. On the other side of the country, Maria Torres had built a completely different life. She had left the city the night David rejected her, taking a bus to her aunt's house in another state with nothing but a suitcase and her unborn child. The first year had been the hardest year of her life. She worked whatever job she could find while pregnant. She cleaned houses, worked in a laundry service, did data entry from home in the evenings. Her aunt helped when she could, but she had her own family to support. When the baby came, a beautiful girl with dark hair and eyes that looked exactly like David's, Maria had cried for 3 days straight, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that she was completely responsible for another human life. She named her daughter Sophie. No middle name, no connection to the Richardson family. Just Sophie Torres, and that was enough. Maria worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She took night classes while Sophie slept, studying accounting because the hours were flexible and the pay was decent. She graduated top of her class from the community college, then transferred to a state university. It took her 8 years of night school, but she finished her degree while raising Sophie and working full-time. By the time Sophie was 10, Maria had become a certified public accountant. By the time Sophie was 15, Maria was managing her own small accounting firm. She specialized in helping small businesses and non-profits, the kind of clients who needed expertise but couldn't afford the big firms. The money was good, not Richardson-level wealth, but comfortable. More importantly, the work was meaningful. Sophie never knew about David. When she asked about her father, which every child eventually does, Maria kept it simple. He was from a different world, sweetheart. Sometimes people make choices based on fear instead of love. He wasn't ready to be a father, and I had to make the best decision for both of us. Sophie had accepted this answer when she was young, though Maria knew the questions would get harder as she got older. But she made sure Sophie never felt the absence of a father. She went to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game. She taught Sophie to be strong, independent, and kind. She showed her daughter that a woman didn't need a man to be complete or successful. Sophie grew up watching her mother work herself to exhaustion and never complain. She saw her mother help their neighbors, volunteer at the community center, and still find time to help with homework. She learned that strength wasn't about never falling down, but about getting back up every single time. When Sophie was accepted to Stanford Business School, Maria cried happy tears for the first time in years. Her daughter had earned a full scholarship, based on her grades and her essay about sustainable business practices. Sophie wanted to change how corporations thought about their environmental impact. She believed businesses could be profitable and responsible at the same time. Stanford changed Sophie's life. She excelled in her classes, joined the Sustainability Club, and graduated at the top of her program with a specialization in corporate environmental responsibility. Companies recruited her before she even had her diploma in hand. She had offers from tech giants, consulting firms, and financial institutions, but Sophie wanted to work for a company that was big enough to make a real difference. She wanted to be where the decisions were made, where policy was created, where she could actually implement the changes she dreamed about. So she applied to 50 major corporations, targeting those with new sustainability initiatives or positions. One of those companies was Richardson Global Industries. They had just announced a major push toward carbon neutrality and sustainable supply chains. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Sophie had been looking for. When the interview invitation arrived, she researched everything she could about the company. She studied their quarterly reports, their sustainability commitments, their leadership structure. She saw David Richardson's photo on the company website, CEO and chairman of the board. He looked powerful and wealthy, the kind of executive she had seen 100 times in business school case studies. She didn't feel any connection to the man in the expensive suit. How could she? She had no idea that half her DNA came from him. Maria knew, of course. When Sophie showed her the interview invitation, Maria's hands had trembled slightly, but she didn't say anything. What was she supposed to say? That Sophie's absent father ran the company? That the man who had rejected them before Sophie was even born was about to meet his own daughter without knowing it? Maria had built a life on moving forward, not looking back. Sophie was 23 years old, brilliant and capable, and she deserved this opportunity on her own merit. Whatever happened, happened. Maria had learned long ago that life had a way of working things out, even if not in the way you expected. The night before the interview, Sophie called her mother from her apartment in the city. She was nervous, excited, talking a mile a minute about her presentation and her ideas and everything she wanted to accomplish. "You're going to be amazing," Maria told her daughter, feeling her heart squeeze with pride and a complicated mixture of other emotions she couldn't quite name. "Just be yourself, that's always been enough." "Thanks, Mom," Sophie said, her voice warm with affection. "I love you. I couldn't have done any of this without you." After they hung up, Maria sat in her quiet living room for a long time, thinking about the strange paths life takes. Tomorrow her daughter would walk into David's office and neither of them would know they were father and daughter. Part of her wondered if she should warn Sophie, tell her the truth before the interview. But another part of her, the part that had survived heartbreak and poverty and single motherhood, trusted that the universe had its own timing. She had protected Sophie for 23 years. Now it was time to let life unfold the way it was meant to. David had no idea that his world was about to change. He sat in his corner office that same evening, reviewing candidate files for tomorrow's interviews. He was tired, bored with the endless parade of ambitious young people who all said the same things and had the same polished resumes. He flipped through another file. Sophie Torres, Stanford graduate, top of her class, impressive portfolio of sustainable business projects. Nothing about her application stood out as particularly different from the dozens of others. He initialed her file and moved on to the next one. Tomorrow would be just another day of interviews, or so he thought. He had no idea that the young woman scheduled for 2 o'clock was about to crack open the carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart. He had no idea that 23 years of regret and guilt were about to come face to face with the daughter he never knew. The universe was about to give David Richardson a second chance he didn't deserve. Whether he would be brave enough to take it this time was another question entirely. The Richardson Global Industries headquarters building was everything Sophie had imagined. 52 floors of glass and steel rising into the sky, with the company logo gleaming at the top. She walked through the revolving doors at exactly 1:30, giving herself plenty of time before her 2 o'clock interview. Her portfolio was perfectly organized. Her presentation on sustainable supply chain management was loaded on her tablet. She had practiced her answers to common interview questions 100 times. She wore her best suit, the one her mother had insisted on buying her for graduation. Everything was ready, but her hands were shaking slightly as she signed in at the security desk. "Sophie Torres for the 2 o'clock interview panel," she told the guard, trying to sound more confident than she felt. He checked his list and handed her a visitor badge. 48th floor. The receptionist will direct you from there." The elevator ride felt like it took forever. Sophie watched the numbers climb, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. This was her dream opportunity. Richardson Global was making real commitments to sustainability, and they had the resources to actually make a difference. If she could get this position, she could help shape policies that would affect millions of people. On the 48th floor, a receptionist with a practiced smile directed her to a waiting area. 3 other candidates were already there, all looking just as nervous as she felt. Sophie took a seat and tried not to fidget with her portfolio. In his office down the hall, David was having the worst kind of day. 2 of his top executives were fighting over budget allocations. A major client was threatening to switch to a competitor. and he had to sit through 4 hours of interviews for a position he honestly didn't care that much about. The sustainability initiative was important, sure, but he had people to manage that. He didn't need to personally interview every junior executive candidate, but the board had insisted. They wanted to show that leadership was committed to the new direction, so here he was, stuck in a conference room with 3 other executives listening to candidate after candidate drone on about their qualifications. The first 2 interviews were forgettable. Standard answers, predictable questions, nothing that grabbed his attention. David found his mind wandering, thinking about the client meeting he was missing, the emails piling up in his inbox. Then the assistant called Sophie's name. She walked into the conference room with her shoulders back and her head high, the way her mother had taught her. Confident but not arrogant, ready but not desperate, she shook hands with each panel member, making eye contact, smiling naturally. When she got to David, something strange happened. He stood to shake her hand, and the moment their eyes met, he felt like someone had knocked the air out of his lungs. Those eyes, dark brown with little gold flecks near the center. He knew those eyes. He had dreamed about those eyes for 23 years, but that was impossible. Maria's eyes, yes, but this was a young woman named Sophie Torres. Just a coincidence. Had to be a coincidence. Except his heart was pounding and his hand was still holding hers a second too long, and she was looking at him with a slightly confused expression. "Mr. Richardson?" she said politely, and he realized he was staring. "Sorry," he said quickly, releasing her hand and sitting back down. "Please have a seat." Sophie sat across from the panel, arranging her materials on the table. She felt a little unsettled by the CEO's strange reaction, but she pushed it aside. Focus. This was her chance. One of the other executives started with the standard questions. "Education, experience, why Richardson Global?" Sophie answered smoothly, but she kept noticing that David was watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Not in a creepy way, exactly. More like he was trying to figure something out. Then it was her turn to present. She pulled up her tablet and walked the panel through her sustainability proposal. She had facts, figures, case studies from other companies. She explained how reducing carbon emissions could actually increase profitability in the long run. She talked about supply chain transparency and ethical sourcing. She was good, and she knew it. The other executives were nodding, taking notes, asking intelligent follow-up questions. But David barely seemed to hear her presentation. He was fixated on her face, her mannerisms, the way she gestured when she talked. "Ms. Torres." David interrupted suddenly, his voice a bit hoarse. "Tell me about your background." "Where are you from?" Sophie blinked, surprised by the personal question. "I grew up in Arizona, sir. Small town, nothing special. And your family?" The other executive shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't standard interview protocol. But David was the CEO, so nobody stopped him. "Just my mother and me," Sophie said carefully. "She raised me on her own. She's an accountant now, runs her own firm." David's face had gone pale. "Your mother? What's her name?" "Maria Torres." Sophie frowned slightly. "Is that relevant to the position?" "Maria, the same name, the same eyes. Raised by a single mother." The pieces were falling into place in David's mind, and he felt like the room was spinning. "How old are you?" he asked, knowing he was crossing every professional boundary but unable to stop himself. 23. Sophie's voice had cooled now. She glanced at the other executives, clearly wondering if this was some kind of test. "Mr. Richardson, I'm not sure I understand what this has to do with the sustainability position." 23. Exactly 23 years since that night. Since Maria had told him she was pregnant. Since he had let her walk away. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The other executives looked at him in alarm. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tight. "I need a moment." He walked out of the conference room, leaving 4 confused people behind. Sophie sat frozen, wondering if she had somehow blown the interview. The other executives exchanged glances, clearly as lost as she was. In the hallway, David leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. His assistant hurried over, concerned. "Sir, are you all right? Should I call someone?" "No," David managed. "I need you to do something for me. Right now. I need every piece of information you can find on Sophie Torres. Everything. Birth records, school records, family history, everything. Sir, that's highly irregular for an interview candidate. I don't care. Do it now. And don't ask questions." Back in the conference room, one of the executives was apologizing to Sophie, making excuses about the CEO having a lot on his plate today. Sophie nodded, trying to be understanding, but inside she was frustrated and confused. What had just happened? Why had he asked all those personal questions about her mother? The interview wrapped up quickly after that. They thanked her for her time and said they would be in touch. Sophie left the building feeling like she had just lived through the strangest hour of her life. She called her mother from the parking lot. "How did it go?" Maria asked, and Sophie could hear the tension in her voice. "It was weird, Mom. Really weird. The CEO asked all these personal questions about you. He wanted to know your name, where I grew up, how old I am. Then he just walked out of the interview. Did I do something wrong?" On the other end of the line, Maria closed her eyes. So it had happened. David had seen Sophie, and some part of him had recognized her even if he didn't fully understand yet. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart," Maria said quietly. "Sometimes life throws us curveballs we don't expect." "What does that mean?" "It means we might need to have a conversation soon. A conversation I've been putting off for 23 years. Mom, you're scaring me. Don't be scared. Just come home this weekend, okay? We'll talk then." After they hung up, Sophie sat in her car, more confused than ever. What conversation? What had her mother been putting off? Meanwhile, David's assistant knocked on his office door with a folder in her hand. Her face was serious. "Sir, I have the information you requested. You're going to want to sit down for this." David took the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a birth certificate. Sophie Torres. Born 8 months after Maria had disappeared from his life. Father, unknown. But David knew. Looking at that date, seeing Maria's name listed as the mother, knowing what he now knew, he understood with absolute certainty. Sophie Torres was his daughter. The daughter he had rejected before she was even born. The daughter he had spent 23 years wondering about. The daughter who had just sat across from him in an interview, not knowing that she was looking at her own father. David sank into his chair, the folder falling from his hands. He had been given a second chance, and he had no idea what to do with it. How could he tell her? How could he possibly explain what he had done? Would she ever forgive him? And Maria knew. Maria had to know that Sophie was interviewing at his company, which meant she had let this happen. Why? For the first time in 23 years, David Richardson realized he was going to have to face the consequences of the worst decision he had ever made. And he had absolutely no idea where to start. David sat in his office for 3 hours after the interview ended, staring at Sophie's file. He read it over and over, looking at her accomplishments, her awards, her recommendations from professors. Everything about her screamed excellence. She was brilliant, driven, compassionate. She had gotten into Stanford on a full scholarship. She had graduated top of her class. She had done all of this without his money, without his name, without him. Maria had raised their daughter to be extraordinary, and he had missed all of it. His assistant had gathered more information. Photos from Sophie's college graduation, her LinkedIn profile, articles she had written about sustainable business practices. In every picture, David could see traces of himself. The shape of her face, the way she smiled with one corner of her mouth higher than the other, the determined set of her jaw. But mostly he saw Maria. Those eyes that had haunted him for 2 decades were looking back at him from his daughter's face. He picked up his phone a dozen times to call Maria, but never completed the call. What would he even say? "Sorry I abandoned you when you were pregnant. Sorry I missed the first 23 years of my daughter's life. Sorry I was too much of a coward to stand up to my mother and the board." By 8 o'clock that evening, David made a decision. He couldn't call. This conversation had to happen face to face. He had his assistant track down Maria's current address. She lived 2 hours away, ran her own accounting firm just like Sophie had said, successful, independent, everything she had become without him. The next morning, David did something he hadn't done in years. He cleared his entire schedule, got in his car himself instead of using a driver, and drove to Maria's office. He didn't make an appointment. He didn't call ahead. He just showed up because if he gave himself time to think about it, he would lose his nerve. Maria's office was in a modest building downtown, nothing fancy but professional and clean. The sign on the door read Torres Financial Services. David stood outside for a full 5 minutes before he could make himself go in. The receptionist looked up when he entered. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Maria Torres. It's urgent. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but she'll want to see me." Tell her David Richardson is here." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly at the name, but she picked up the phone and called back to Maria's office. There was a long pause, then she hung up and looked at David with an unreadable expression. "She says to go back. Last door on the right." David walked down the hallway, his heart pounding harder with each step. The last time he had seen Maria, she had been crying in his penthouse, gathering her things, telling him she was pregnant. Now she was on the other side of this door, successful and strong, and he had no idea what kind of reception he was about to get. He knocked softly. "Come in," Maria's voice said, and just hearing it after all these years made David's chest tighten. He opened the door and stepped inside. Maria sat behind a desk, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She had aged, of course, but she was still beautiful. Her hair was shorter now, with a few streaks of gray. She wore a professional blazer and glasses, but those eyes, the eyes that both she and Sophie shared, looked at him with a mixture of emotions he couldn't quite read. "Hello, David," she said quietly. "I wondered how long it would take you." "You knew," David said, closing the door behind him. "You knew Sophie was interviewing at my company." "Of course I knew. She told me about the interview. I saw your company name and your photo on the website." Maria's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "I've known where you were for 23 years, David. I've watched your company grow, seen your face in business magazines, read about your divorce. I've always known exactly where you were. Why didn't you tell me about her?" The words came out more desperately than he intended. "Why didn't you tell me I had a daughter?" Maria's calm expression finally cracked, showing a flash of anger. "I tried to tell you, David, that night in your penthouse I told you I was pregnant. You stood there silent while your mother accused me of trying to trap you. You didn't fight for me. You didn't fight for our child. You made your choice, but I was wrong," David said, his voice breaking. "I was so wrong, Maria. I've regretted that night every single day for 23 years. I tried to find you. I hired investigators, but you disappeared completely. I had to disappear. I couldn't raise our daughter in the shadow of your rejection. I couldn't have her growing up knowing her father had money and power and chose not to be part of her life. So I left and I built a life where we didn't need you." David sank into the chair across from her desk, suddenly feeling every one of his 55 years. "Tell me about her, please. Tell me about Sophie." Maria was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer. "She's everything good in this world, David. She's kind and smart and determined. She volunteers at an environmental nonprofit every weekend. She donates part of her salary to help kids from low-income families go to college. She calls me every single day just to check in. She's better than either of us deserve. Does she know about me? She knows she has a father somewhere. I never lied to her about that. But I never told her who you were or where to find you. I told her that you came from a different world and that you made choices based on fear." Maria paused. "I never spoke badly about you to her, David. I never turned her against you. I just let her grow up without the weight of your absence. Why did you let her interview at my company if you didn't want us to meet?" Maria leaned back in her chair, looking tired suddenly. "Because she earned that opportunity on her own merit. Richardson Global has the best sustainability program of any major corporation. It's her dream job. What kind of mother would I be if I told her she couldn't pursue her dreams because of my past?" "So what happens now?" David asked. "She recognized something was off during the interview. She called you, didn't she?" "Yes, she's coming home this weekend. I'm going to tell her the truth." David felt panic rising in his chest. "What will you tell her? What will she think of me?" "I'm going to tell her exactly what happened. That we were young, that you were under pressure, that you made a choice you regretted, and then I'm going to let her decide if she wants to meet you." "And if she doesn't want to?" Maria's expression was firm. "Then you'll respect that choice, David. You gave up your rights to her 23 years ago. You don't get to force your way into her life now just because it's convenient for you." The words stung, but David knew they were fair. He had no right to demand anything. "I want to make this right," he said quietly. "I know I can't undo the past, but I want to try. I want to know my daughter if she'll let me. That's not up to you anymore. It's up to Sophie." Maria stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'll tell her this weekend. After that, the choice is hers. If she wants to meet you, I'll arrange it. If she doesn't, you need to leave her alone. She's been happy without you, David. Don't ruin that just to ease your own guilt." David stood too, feeling like his legs might not hold him. "Can I ask you one more thing?" Maria waited. "Did you hire someone to send her application to my company?" Did you plan for this to happen? For the first time, Maria almost smiled. Sophie applied to 50 companies, David. Yours was just one of them. I didn't plan anything. But maybe the universe did. Maybe it decided you deserved one more chance even if you don't deserve it. Life has a funny way of working things out. David walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, Maria, you were right that night. About everything. My empire didn't keep me warm. It wasn't worth what I gave up. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too blind to see it. Maria's eyes glistened slightly, but her voice stayed steady. I know, David, I've always known. But knowing doesn't change what happened. It doesn't give me back those years I struggled alone. It doesn't give Sophie back the father she never had. I know, but maybe if she gives me a chance, I can be the father she deserves from now on. Maybe, Maria said softly. But you need to understand something. She doesn't need you, David. She doesn't need your money or your name or your connections. If she chooses to know you, it will be because she wants to, not because she needs to. Can you handle being wanted instead of needed? It was a question David had never considered. His whole life, people had needed him. The company needed him, investors needed him, employees needed him. But wanted? Just for being himself, not for what he could provide? I don't know, he admitted. But I'd like the chance to find out. Maria nodded slowly. Then wait. I'll call you after I talk to Sophie. Whatever happens after that is between the two of you. But David, if you hurt her, if you let her down the way you let me down, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. That's not a threat. That's a promise from a mother who has spent 23 years protecting her child. I understand, David said. And he did. He had seen the strength in Maria's eyes, the fierce love she had for their daughter. Sophie had grown up with that love protecting her. He could only hope he would get the chance to show her a different kind of love. A father's love, even if he was 23 years too late. He left Maria's office and drove back to the city, not knowing what the next few days would bring. For the first time in decades, David Richardson's future wasn't in his control. It was in the hands of a 23-year-old woman who didn't even know he was her father yet. And somehow that felt exactly right. Sophie drove home that weekend with a knot in her stomach. Her mother's voice on the phone had been strange, careful, like she was choosing every word with precision. A conversation 23 years in the making. What could that possibly mean? She pulled into her mother's driveway Saturday morning and found Maria waiting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. That was never a good sign. Coffee on the porch meant serious conversation time. Hey, Mom, Sophie said, climbing the steps and accepting the mug. You're starting to freak me out a little. Maria smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Sit with me for a bit. We need to talk about something important. They sat in the old rocking chairs that had been there since Sophie was a kid. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Maria took a deep breath. That interview you had this week, at Richardson Global. Tell me again what happened with the CEO. Sophie frowned. It was weird, like I told you. He asked all these personal questions about you, about where I grew up, how old I am. Then he just walked out. Mom, what's going on? Do you know him? I did, a long time ago. Maria set down her coffee cup and turned to face her daughter. Sophie, sweetheart, there's something I should have told you years ago, but I was trying to protect you. David Richardson is your father. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Sophie stared at her mother, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say she was joking. But Maria's face was serious, sad, and completely honest. What? Sophie's voice came out as barely a whisper. I met him when I was 26. He was 32. We were together for 3 years, and I loved him more than I thought it was possible to love someone. Maria's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. When I got pregnant with you, his mother gave him an ultimatum. Choose the family business or choose us, and he chose the business. Sophie felt like the world was tilting sideways. The CEO of Richardson Global, the billionaire. That's my father? Yes. And he rejected us? He rejected me before I was even born. He was under enormous pressure, Sophie. His father had just died, and he was about to take over a massive company. His mother convinced him that I was trying to trap him, that someone like me didn't belong in his world. Maria reached for Sophie's hand, but Sophie pulled away, standing up abruptly. Someone like you? Mom, you're amazing. You built your own business from nothing. You put yourself through college while raising me. You're worth 1,000 of him. I know that now. And honestly, I knew it then too. That's why I left. I wasn't going to stay where I wasn't wanted, and I wasn't going to let you grow up in the shadow of his rejection. Sophie paced the porch, her mind racing. So that's why he was acting so strange in the interview. He recognized me somehow. He figured it out. He came to see me at my office 2 days ago. He knows you're his daughter. Sophie spun around. He came to see you? What did he say? That he was sorry. That he's regretted his choice every day for 23 years. That he wants a chance to know you if you're willing. If I'm willing. Sophie's voice rose with anger. He gets to abandon us, live his billionaire life, and then just waltz back in when it's convenient? No. Absolutely not. Maria stood and walked to her daughter, placing both hands on her shoulders. Sophie, listen to me. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm not even asking you to meet him. But I'm asking you to think about it before you make a decision out of anger. Why would you defend him? After what he did to you, to us? I'm not defending him. What he did was wrong, and I'll never pretend otherwise. But holding on to anger only hurts you, sweetheart. I learned that a long time ago. I built a good life, and I raised an incredible daughter, and I didn't let his absence define us. You don't have to let it define you either. Sophie sank back into the chair, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to feel right now. I'm angry and confused, and I feel like my whole life has been a lie. Your life hasn't been a lie. Everything you've accomplished, everything you are, that's all real. That's all you. Whether you have a relationship with David Richardson or not doesn't change any of that. They sat together for a long time. Sophie crying and Maria holding her, the way she had done 1,000 times throughout Sophie's childhood. Eventually, Sophie's tears slowed. What do I do, Mom? That's your choice. Not mine, not his, yours. Sophie was quiet for a moment. What do you think I should do? Maria smiled sadly. I think you should listen to your heart. But I also think that everyone deserves a chance to explain themselves, even if you decide not to forgive them. You don't have to make any decisions right now. You can take all the time you need. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophie went through every emotion possible. Anger, hurt, confusion, curiosity. She Googled her father obsessively, reading every article about him, watching interviews, trying to understand who he was. She saw the successful businessman, the philanthropist, the man who had built an empire. But she also saw something in his eyes in the more recent photos. A sadness, a loneliness. Meanwhile, David waited. Maria had told him that Sophie knew, but she wasn't ready to meet him yet. He had to give her space, let her process. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, knowing his daughter was out there, knowing she was angry and hurt, and not being able to fix it. He sent one letter through Maria. Not excuses, not justifications, just the truth. He explained what happened that night, his fears, his weakness, his regret. He told Sophie that he didn't expect forgiveness, but he hoped she might give him a chance to at least explain in person. The choice was hers. Sophie read the letter a dozen times. The handwriting was neat, controlled, but she could see places where the pen had pressed harder, where emotion had broken through. He sounded genuinely sorry, but sorry didn't give her back 23 years. Finally, after 3 weeks of internal debate, Sophie called her mother. I want to meet him, she said. Just coffee, 1 hour. I need to look him in the eye and hear him explain why he wasn't there. Maria arranged it. A coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory the following Saturday at 10 in the morning. Sophie arrived 15 minutes early, too nervous to be on time. She ordered a coffee she wouldn't drink and sat at a corner table. David arrived exactly at 10. He looked older than in his photos, more nervous. He was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, not the expensive suits from the business magazines. He spotted Sophie and froze for a moment, then slowly walked to her table. Thank you for agreeing to meet me, he said quietly. Can I sit? Sophie nodded, not trusting her voice yet. David sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, father and daughter, strangers connected by blood. I don't know where to start, David finally said. Start with the truth, Sophie replied. No corporate speeches, no carefully worded explanations. Just tell me why you weren't there. So David did. He told her everything. About the pressure from his mother, the ultimatums from the board, his own fears and weaknesses. He told her about trying to find Maria, about his failed marriage, about the emptiness that had followed him for 23 years. He didn't make excuses. He owned every mistake. Sophie listened without interrupting, her face carefully neutral. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You made a choice," she finally said. "And that choice meant I grew up without a father. Do you have any idea what that was like? Watching other kids with their dads at school events, wondering what was wrong with me that made my father not want me." "Nothing was wrong with you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect, Sophie. Your mother raised you to be extraordinary. Everything you've accomplished, that's all you. I didn't contribute anything to that. You're right. You didn't. Mom did everything. She worked herself to exhaustion to give me opportunities. She was at every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. She was both parents. And she did it without your help, without your money, without you. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that I wasn't there to help her, to help you. But Sophie, I can't change the past. I can only ask if there's any possibility for a future. Not as your CEO, not as some wealthy benefactor, just as your father, even if that relationship looks different than traditional father-daughter relationships." Sophie took a sip of her cold coffee, thinking, "I got the job offer from Richardson Global yesterday. Very generous package. Was that because of my qualifications or because you're my father? You got that offer before I even knew you were my daughter." The panel was unanimous. "You earned it on your own merit. But I understand if you don't want to work there now." "I don't know what I want," Sophie admitted. "I'm angry at you, but I also see that you're genuinely sorry. I don't need you, but maybe part of me wants to know you. I just don't know if I can forgive you." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," David said. "I'm just asking for a chance. Maybe we start with coffee once a month. Maybe we email occasionally. Whatever you're comfortable with. I promise I won't push, won't try to buy your affection, won't try to make up for lost time because I know I can't. I just want to be part of your life going forward, in whatever small way you'll allow." Sophie studied his face, seeing her own features reflected back at her. She thought about her mother's words about holding on to anger, about making choices from a place of clarity rather than emotion. "One coffee a month," she said slowly. "No expectations, no pressure. You tell me about your life, I'll tell you about mine. We see if we can build something from nothing. But the first time you disappoint me, the first time you prioritize your company over showing up, we're done. I've lived 23 years without you. I can live the rest of my life that way too." "That's fair," David said, and Sophie could see tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Sophie. You won't regret this." "Maybe I will," Sophie said honestly. "But Mom taught me that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst mistake. So here's yours. Don't waste it." They talked for another hour, awkward and careful, two people trying to build a bridge across 23 years of absence. It wasn't comfortable and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. Sophie took the job at Richardson Global. She made it clear to everyone that she was there on her own merit, not as the boss's daughter, and slowly, painfully, she and David built a relationship. It would take years before she could call him Dad, years before the hurt faded enough to allow real love in. But they were both willing to put in the work. Maria watched from a distance, proud of her daughter's strength and grace. She and David found an unexpected friendship, united by their love for Sophie. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. And sometimes that's enough.